Welcome everyone. Good day to all of you who have gathered here today to commemorate the birth centenary of Professor Kenneth and death centenary of Professor Carl Menger. I am Professor Subir Dasgupta, Coordinator of Internal Quality Assurance Cell of Maulana Azad College, Kolkata. And it is my honor to start off today's webinar, Every Child Counts Towards a More Democratic Education. We have our esteemed speaker today, Professor Abhijit Vinayak Banerjee, currently the Ford Foundation International Professor of Economics at MIT. As we all know, he is a Nobel laureate for his groundbreaking work on alleviation on global poverty, and we are glad to have him among us today.
Hello everyone. Good afternoon. As principal of Maulana Azad College, I would like to welcome all of you to this webinar. The webinar is being held in commemoration of two legends, great masters of economics, Professor Kenneth and Professor Carl Menger. Today's keynote address will be delivered by Professor Abhijit Vinayak Banerjee, who needs no introduction to the audience. I warmly welcome him. We are extremely happy for this occasion. I feel truly humbled and honored to have the opportunity to host him, and I hope all of you are equally excited at the opportunity to hear him. No extent of gratitude could express our appreciation for sparing his time today. I'd like to thank Mr. Abhijit Pathak, a former student of this college, who took the initiative for this webinar to happen by all kinds of active support. I must also thank Professor Achin Chakraborty, the director and professor IDSK, for giving his consent to be the moderator of. Without further delay, let me hand it over to Professor Subir Dasgupta, who will take this program ahead. Thank you all.
Thank you, sir. Now I request Professor Santanu Ghosh, Professor and Head Department of Economics, Maulana Azad College, to continue this program. Along with us, Professor Achin Chakraborty is there, who will moderate the entire session. So over to Professor Santanu Ghosh.
Thank you, Professor Dasgupta. Respected dignitaries, dear friends, it is an immense privilege for Maulana Azad College, Kolkata, to organize today's event and have among us Professor Abhijit Vinayak Banerjee as our distinguished speaker. Today's lecture has been organized to pay tributes to two luminaries of economic science by commemorating the birth centenary of Professor Kenneth and the centenary of Professor Carl Menger. Professor Arrow was one of the outstanding economists of the post-Second World War era. Founder of the Austrian School of Economics, on the other hand, laid the foundation of marginal economics and value theory, along with Leo Walras, William Stanley Jevons, Wilfred Pareto, and Alfred Marshall. Professor Arrow was born on August 23, 1920. Professor Arrow was born on August 23, 1921, and we are happy that thanks to Professor Banerjee, we have been able to organize this event at the right time, in a sense. I now hand over the proceedings. Professor Achin Chakraborty, please.
Good evening to all of you, and thank you, Professor Subhashish Dr. Professor Subir Dasgupta, and Professor Santanu Ghosh. And I take it as a matter of great honor and privilege to be here today and to moderate, even though I'm not sure exactly what I'm going to moderate, because Abhijit is going to speak and we are going to listen to him. So that's all that we are here. We have gathered here to listen to him. I just say one or two things because Abhijit, needs no introduction, even though it sounds very cliche, but still I must say that Abhijit doesn't need any introduction. So Professor Abhijit Banerjee, and here Santanu, Ghosh and myself, we remember that together we actually came to Maulana Azad College to write our BSc Part 1 exam. So, so that's something to remember since Maulana Azad College is organizing it. And thank you very much, Abhijit, for having agreed to speak to us. Without further ado, let me request Abhijit to start his talk. He's going to talk about every child counts toward a democratic education. Over to Abhijit, please. Just before you start, Abhijit, would you like to have questions at the end of your talk?
Yeah, I have 1 hour, and I'll be done in about 45 minutes, and then you can. The time is yours.
Okay, so in that case, I request the participants to type in their questions in the chat box. Okay, over to Abhijit now. Thank you very
much. Thank you for having me. Thank you to nice to see the faces of old friends. As Achin said, it takes us back many years. I daren't reveal how many. Our BA Part 1 was 41 years ago. It's time has passed. Okay, I'm going to share screen so you can see my slides. So this is I will confess I know nothing about Professor Menger's work, but I think it's a subject that I knew Professor Arrow very vaguely, but a little bit. And I think it would have appealed to him. I think he was deeply committed to democracy. I think from the beginning, in a sense, his PhD thesis, which is maybe the most, to me, is the most stunning piece of economic theory done in the entire 20th century, is the Arrow Impossibility Theorem, which comes from wrestling with what it would take to build a democracy where everybody's views are always taken into account in some way or the other. And I think that challenge that he threw has never really been resolved. And in some ways, the many failures of democracy we see in the world, this is not a great time to be in the world for people who are pro-democracy. In some ways, it's a frightening moment where many democratic impulses seem to be, falling into much more autocratic and authoritarian, into the vector of authoritarianism seems to be everywhere. But I think he cared deeply about both, I think, education and about democracy. And in that sense, I think he would have approved of the topic. So what's the background? What do I mean by less democratic education? Well, let me remind us. I think if you think about what's happening right now, roughly 320 million children have been affected by school closures since the beginning of the pandemic. We still don't know for sure when they're going to reopen. And the government of India from the beginning called for a rapid shift to online learning. I think every state government, including the government of West Bengal, put a fair amount of effort into providing material, but it's not, the problem isn't just the material. The problem is the other side. You can't listen to lecture online if you don't have internet. And internet access is very limited. It's a little bit better than these numbers, according to, if you use all the families that have access to smartphones, that's a little higher than this, but it's still a number which excludes many, many people, very large proportion of maybe certainly more than 50% of the rural population, certainly more than 75% of the rural low-income population. So this is a given that in some ways that we are going to it's that the educational system was already, as I say, in a bit failing a lot of children, and now exactly those children, the children who come from backgrounds whose parents can't afford internet, whose parents can't afford to support them in other ways in learning at home, those are the kids who have been most hit by this particular pandemic. But I think sadly, this is not something that is new. It's going to make things worse. But the problem is in some ways well known. It's an old problem. We know that there is schools are everywhere. That's one problem we have solved, and almost all school-age children are enrolled in school. Then there's a question of, do they go to school? And West Bengal is one of the states where attendance is below 60%, according to the ASAR numbers, the 2018 ASAR numbers. So less than 60% West Bengal with Bihar, UP, Madhya Pradesh, bunch of states where children don't go to school. And I think that's not, and I want to start by putting on the table that should be seen as an index of the failure of the system. That if schools are available but kids don't want to come, I think it makes no sense to blame the kid. It's because school is fundamentally not very attractive that they don't show up. And likewise, low learning levels. West Bengal is at the national average of learning levels in reading and sort of at the same in math. And 50% of children in class 5 read at class 2 level or below. And that's been true, that's been true year after year. We've seen that this in the first ASAR is in 2005. And these are numbers from 2018 ASAR, and it's really, if anything, it's got a slightly worse, but certainly we haven't solved this problem. So that's the sense in which this thing we have been failing for a long time. This is you can see basically this is attendance. Average attendance for all of India is about 71% in October and September, on a random day in September, October, and November. This is 2017 statistics reported in 2018, and that's you can see the map. You can see where it's high. It's high in the west and the southwest and the south. Then it's lower, and in the east, it's really very low. this is another number I just mentioned, which is the national number now. 50% of children who read at second grade level. And it's completely flat, as you can see. We're not, there is, lots of, we certainly are not unaware of this. There is a lot of discussion in public fora, but the number of children who can read at class 2 level really hasn't changed. It really hasn't changed for a long time. If anything has gone down slightly, the fraction has gone down slightly. Now, this is what the equivalent is in math. So here's a slightly different way of giving you the same numbers. These are the equivalent of what is asked for in the Azad test. And you can see that 50% of children, all India, can do 52 minus 24. Those children, some, about half of them, can do the next step, which is dividing 869 by 7. The other half can't. So these are in class 5. You can go up to class 8, and you see that it improves. And it improves quite fast, actually, as children get older. And so in class 8, a higher fraction. This is partly because the children get better, partly because, unfortunately, the weakest children drop out. But you can see that that number isn't particularly encouraging, even in. Now, let me say something controversial, which is whenever I've said this, I've been attacked. Now, I think I've been saying this for 15 years now or 20 years now, and I guess I'm used to being attacked. By global standards, teachers in India are highly paid. What do I mean by that? I mean, I'm going to compare teacher salaries to GDP per capita. Now, that's not perfect, because GDP per capita, you might say, in poorer countries, maybe really educated people are more scarce, so they should be a bit more expensive, but they're a lot more expensive. We are paid, teachers in India relative to GDP are paid 2 to 3 times they're paid in many countries, like in France, where I'm speaking from. India's relative to GDP per capita, Indian teachers are extremely well paid. So well paid that, in many states, you have to actually bribe somebody to get these jobs, and not trivial amounts. I've heard numbers like 10 lakhs, 20 lakhs for getting a teacher's job. They're much higher in the public sector, often by a factor of 10, than the private sector schools that a lot of children attend. West Bengal is interesting, one of the states where children mostly go to government schools. That's partly because the government actually funds a lot of private schools, and so the distinction is less clear. But in most states, there are lots of what one would call low-cost private schools. Many of them. I think I saw a statistic in some parts of India. The number is every child has access to 7 private or public schools within 2 kilometers. So it's not they have access to many schools. These schools are much cheaper than the public schools to run, because teachers are paid about 1/10 of what, not between 1/10 and maybe 1/3 of what public school teachers are paid. It's also true that there is, to the extent that we know, in West Bengal here, there's a lot of contract teachers who are paid a fraction of the teacher's salary. There are some studies which compare them to the civil service teachers, and certainly there's no evidence that the well-paid civil service teachers are more effective. This is consistent with evidence from Indonesia, where there was a randomized controlled trial where in some schools, actually a lot of schools, teacher pay was doubled, with the idea that it would give teachers better motivation and attract better teachers. And nothing happened to test scores. Similar, another experiment in Kenya, less dramatic, but has the same experience, which is really teacher salary is, changing teacher salary seems to do nothing. This is public sector teacher salaries, seems to do nothing to the quality of teaching. Likewise, other thing you might be concerned about is class size. Now, class size is a problem, I think, once you go to high school. But actually, in primary schools in India, class size in many states has been dropping because of the exit to private schools. So the average class size has been actually falling in many states, to the point where states like Madhya Pradesh have decided to close a bunch of schools because there's just not enough students coming to them. And they have consolidated the schools. So it's not class size. Now, is that a good thing or a bad thing? Well, we have actually some work in Maharashtra and Gujarat showing that when you cut the class size by 50%, nothing happens to the test scores. So again, class size doesn't seem to be a problem. It's not because of high class size. In fact, our class sizes are small. They're comparable to what they are in many countries, 20, 25 in primary school. Then in high school, I think there are real issues, and I want to get into those. Another hypothesis, which you hear from a lot of people, is that, these teachers, they're in the civil service, they don't have incentives. Now, it's true that small improvements are possible by sort of improving incentives. There's two studies which find relatively small effects, but not zero effects. One is in Rajasthan, where teachers who were given an incentive to attend, these are NGO schools, they attended more, and the children scored better at the end line, and significantly better. I'll say something about what I mean by not huge, but significantly. And there is a paper by Muralidharan and Sundaraman in Andhra Pradesh showing that if you give teachers incentives based on the children's test scores, you do get an increase in test scores. That's actually unusual. There's actually global evidence suggesting that, in fact, incentives based on test scores almost never work. So this is actually unusual that they found something. There's a lot of studies across the world finding almost no effects. And in some ways, I think that's consistent with something that we have noticed for a long time, which is that if you just compare private schools, these private schools, I talked to you about the private schools, the low-cost private schools with the public schools. You would think that private schools have a lot stronger incentive to deliver quality than public schools. I mean, after all, there are many of them. And if one school is not good enough, then parents can move their children to a different one. And so private schools have strong incentive to deliver on performance. If you look at the ASAR results, you do see that the private schools do somewhat better. Again, especially if you control for the background of the parents who send their children to private school, the effects are not huge. There's some difference. But it turns out that all of that can be accounted for by the selection of the children. There's different children who are more motivated, parents who are more motivated, send their children to private schools. If you look at there's a large RCT in Andhra Pradesh, and in that randomized controlled trial, they compare children's performance. So there were some children, families were given vouchers to send their children to private school. This is sort of your classic Milton Friedman. Milton Friedman was one of the, I guess, at least he claimed he was a follower of Karl Menger. So Milton Friedman had suggested that you should give vouchers to children and their parents to choose their schools. If you look at that, the effect of that, I'm going to try to find the graph in a second. Sorry. Yeah. So here's the graph. You can see that the green is the greenish blue is the schools which were the results in year 4, so 4 years of exposure. The red is after 2 years of exposure. And the striking fact is that if you take the 2 bottom sets, which may be hard to read, they're math and Telugu, it's negative. The effect of being sent to a private school on both math and Telugu, which are your basic skills, if you like, in Andhra Pradesh, both get worse when you send children to private school. They get better in English, and if you combine them, it depends on how much weight you put on English. They also get better in Hindi, but these are not the most important, or at least the most obviously important things for very young children in Andhra Pradesh. And so, you can add them in some way, and when you add them, you can, depending on how much weight you put on English and Hindi, you get, the children in government schools learn almost no Hindi, and no English, so you get a big improvement from sending them to private schools. Whether that improvement is worth much in objective terms is questionable, but on net, at best, you could say there is no difference between the schools. So private schools with all the incentives, if you compare the same child, because the same child could have gone to government school or private school, you see no difference. Now, all of this, to summarize, brings us into, let me see if I can find, I'm sorry, my slides are a bit maybe messed up, but okay, I think they're now in the right order. So how do we know that this is not because the children are not able to learn? You have this, I think, this very nice coded word that a lot of international organizations now use, which is to say that, well, maybe these children are lacking childhood nourishment, and as a result, they never learned, had the ability to learn, and they don't learn because they're really handicapped at some level. They just don't have the ability to learn. This is an idea. This is an idea that you hear a lot in international discussions, and I would say there's no particular reason to believe it. And here's some evidence that it's not true. So there was a team led by a psychologist at Harvard University, a child psychologist at Harvard University, did a number of tests, both in Cambridge, Massachusetts, where Harvard and MIT are, where all the students all the 2 and 3 year olds were children of, graduate students, professors, other well-educated people, and in the slums of Delhi. Okay, so this was the same test. And the reason why you could do the same test is it's actually a mathematics test. So meaning you've never been taught any mathematics, but can you see which shape is bigger than which shape, which set of numbers? If I show you 2 spreads of numbers, can you see of dots? Can you say which set of dots is bigger? So these are what are called non-symbolic math skills. So symbolic is like 2, 3, 4. Non-symbolic is, can I identify what looks like what, or what is bigger than what? And in those tests, the children in Delhi slums do exactly as well as the children in Cambridge, Massachusetts, who come from the most privileged families, whose parents are all PhDs and all that, or would be PhDs. So we have no reason to think that our children lack skills. I come back to this point. It's not because children lack skills that we can't teach them. It's very important to say that. I'll show you one. One other form of this. So we did this study in Kolkata and Delhi, and the study was organized around vegetable and fruit markets. Okay? So there are lots of children who are sole sellers in these markets. We first scouted the market. We identified the sole sellers, the sellers who are not helped by any adult. And I'll tell you a little bit about them in a minute. These children were then asked if, we sent a set of mystery shoppers to them. Mystery shoppers are people who just come and say, I want 300 grams of tomatoes and 400 grams of carrots. They ask for it. The child says, okay, that will be 45 rupees. They give them 100 or 200 rupee amount, and they get the change back, and they go away. If the child, if they don't believe the amount, they already know the amount because they can calculate it. They sometimes tell the child, oh no, that doesn't sound right. The child recalculates and gives them the amount. And this we did in both Calcutta and Delhi. In Delhi, we also did a bit more because we actually, let me back up. So then the next thing we did was actually tell the child, go back after we had the three measurement exercises. We went back to the child and said, child's parent or guardian, and said, can we do a Azad test on this child? And most children agreed. Not every child, but most children agreed. We gave them an Azad test, the test you saw, the subtraction, division, etc. We then, because we were worried that maybe the Azad test is different because it's a written test, we gave them oral problems. And the oral problems started from being exactly like the market problem. So, instead of, carrots at 60 rupees, we say carrots at 50 rupees and peas at 70 rupees instead of peas at 80 rupees. And we say, how much would it be? And so they do the recalculate. That's step one. Step two is we give them slightly more difficult problems, much higher prices, like we say it's meat, and meat costs much more, and so on, and fish, and so we change the units. So we start making the problem still very real, but slightly more not what they do every day. Okay, so that's the exercise. We start by looking at can they do the job they do every day, and then we switch to things that they might be similar things, but increasingly different. Now, these children mostly are in school. If they're in school, they're in 6th or 7th grade. Many of them sell goods by kilogram. They sell vegetables. This was the test they were given. Okay. And let me come back to this graphic first. Sorry. It's messed up. Okay. So the next thing we did, and maybe no, I should, this is what I should be. So we also went to schools that were next doors to the to the slums where the markets where we're doing these tests. Because mostly the children live near the market. So we went to those low-income areas in Delhi and Kolkata. In Delhi, this was done in Delhi only. And we got permission from the school to do an exercise with the school children of doing the same thing as we had done, which is buy vegetables, but now buy with the plastic vegetables from these school children. And we did the same thing, 200 grams of peppers, 300 grams of brinjal, okay? Exact same thing. We did it with the school children. Let me say one more thing. I don't know how this got so messed up. Okay. So first fact, in the Azad test, school children do much better, same age, by the way. We balanced it by age. So in Delhi, most of the market children were in class 7, so we took basically class 7 children. And you can see that the school children do much better in the Azad test. The 57% of the school children can do a division, only 16% of the market children can do division. So that's sort of consistent with the general view that, you know, these children are maybe the ones in the market, maybe they're not particularly good at, school, so they are in the market. They don't have talent. Now look at what happens when you reverse that. So this is the market children. The first time the market children, the first transaction, they don't do so well. And partly that's because they actually tell you, but nobody buys 300 grams anymore. Why are you trying to buy 300 grams? And so when you say 300 grams, they're a bit surprised. But then the next couple of times they get used to it. And 95% of the time they do well, already. They get the right answer. They do give the answer instantly, by the way. They never use a calculator or any written aids. They do give it kind of off the bat. They give you the right answer. And if you sometimes, when they have the wrong answer, they challenge, they fix it. So about 4 to 5% of the time, they get it wrong. School children get it wrong roughly 40 to 50% of the time. Same, remember the school children were doing very well in the test. And the reason why they do well is they have no idea how to do mental mathematics. They do these extremely complicated calculations on paper. It takes them 10 minutes to do the same math that a child in the market does in 20 seconds. And they get it wrong. Okay, so it's not, and again, this is just to make the point, the lack of talent is not the reason why children in the markets don't do well in the Azad test. And I'll tell you in a minute what I think is the reason. But it's very clear that these children in the market have lots of skills. They're much better at mental calculations than not just the market children, but look at the market adults. They're better than everyone. They really are extremely good at, and and as we made the problem more complicated, it got less good, meaning when we asked them much bigger numbers, they were not used to it, but still they were doing it right 60, 70% of the time. With meat and fish, where the numbers were much bigger, they were still getting it right, mostly. In other words, they are actually quite talented in mental mathematics, much more talented than many of the people I encounter as cashiers in the US or in other countries, where they can't do any mental calculations. They have long given up on that. So it's not lack of talent. It is not teacher's salary and other resources, it's not incentive. So what is it that explains why these children don't do well? I think one very important piece of it, at least, is the way we teach. We teach in a fundamentally undemocratic way, in the sense that these children were something we noticed, the market children, when you give them the Asar problem, they don't just look at it and say, well, I can do this. They start to write down things, but they actually don't know how to write the division problem. Remember, when you do a division, you have to stack the numbers in a particular way. You first take the multiple of whatever the number you're dividing by, you take the closest multiple, then you take a remainder, you construct the next number, and so on. And they were often doing, we do that usually from right to left. These kids, a lot of them were trying to do it from left to right. When I was looking at one of them, he said, well, you know, I don't want to do this. I can't do this. If I could do this, I would be in school. In other words, his sense, even though he was extremely talented at doing mental math, is that that math is something that fundamentally, school math is a different thing. It has nothing to do with mental math. It's just an entirely different object which lives in its own world. The teachers tell you that this is the algorithm you have to follow. If you don't follow this algorithm, it's not right. So they all try to follow the algorithm, then the teaching isn't so good, so they don't understand the algorithm and they give up. Instead of appealing to their own talent to say that, look, you know, you can do this in your head. I don't care how you do it. We insist that there is a process which you have to go through. This is more generally, we have this enormous tyranny of the curriculum. We teach what needs to, we have a list of things that need to be taught. We insist that the child learns all of them without examining whether that's useful for the child, whether the child is understanding it, whether it makes any sense in this context. If he can divide by, divide in his head, why does he need to learn the algorithm first? Yeah, give him confidence in what he learned, and maybe at some point he learns the algorithm. But first, the thing he should be given is the chance to use his intuitive understanding. We don't use, we have no faith in the intuitive sense of the children's ability to learn. So we insist that we check off boxes. Have you taught this today, that today, that today? And that is a problem that we face in almost every developing country. We've done similar work in Kenya, we've seen in Cote d'Ivoire, so lots of countries, and even to some extent in countries like France. Part of the difference, reason why a country like Finland does so much better than other countries in the international PISA test, is Finland is a country where they don't at all insist on any content learning till you are 10 years old or something. Their education system is entirely focused on, do you have the basic skills, do you have the confidence to use them? Are you able to ask questions, think about something, give me the answer? We don't care how you do it. We don't care what content you have learned. You don't have to know the capital of Estonia. You just have to be able to think aloud. And I think that is a very different attitude to education. So I would say that, and when you actually teach children what they want to learn, they learn very fast. So there is Pratham, a well-known NGO in India, developed this idea of teaching at the right level. And it's very simple. It's very much the idea, at any point, let's forget about which grade the child is supposed to be in. Let's see what the child knows and doesn't know. And if the child doesn't know how to read, let's not teach him history. Let's teach him, or at least let's not insist he reads the textbook in history, since he can't. He can tell him stories of history, but let's try to deal with what he needs to know, which is how to read. So he may be in class 5, but if he can't read, he cannot read the history textbook. So let's start by assessing where each child is, then group the child for a part of the day instead of, some part of the day you play with your classmates or your same age. Sometimes we put them in the same classroom with other children, older and younger than them, who have the same skill level, and we focus on teaching them the skill. Turns out that when you do that, you can get very fast improvements very quickly. And then after a week or two, you can be switched back to a different group and so on. So there's been 15 years of work we've done on this, testing out this technology. Here's one example. This is something we did in UP. In the school year, for half a day on 20 days, in two sets of 20 days, the children were taught not the curriculum, but what skills they need to learn. This was done in a study of 360 schools in Barabanki district in UP. And we see that in a matter of 40 days of teaching, the gains are bigger than a year-to-year improvement in a child. So a child gains more in these 40 days than a whole academic year. And the gap, he closes more than 2/3 of the gap between the bottom child and the median child. These are very cheap. Now this is being done in many countries. So in other words, it's easy enough to fix this problem. If we don't do it, we don't do it because at some level we haven't quite figured out what priorities to choose. So and in the meanwhile, I think the opportunities are, the whole digital space has been, opened up a lot in this last last 1.5 years of struggling to keep schools, do something when the schools are closed. And I think we are also learning that there are lots of opportunities to use the digital technologies to also be attentive to children. In some ways, it's easy to use digital technologies because children can then self-pace. The computer can understand that, if you are failing to solve this problem, what do you need to learn? And when you use that, again, you see very large gains in learning. This is a study in Rajasthan with a software called MindSpark, and you see very large gains across science, history, language, math. Interestingly, parents are not, and this is something we've seen before, self-paced computer-based learning 20 years ago was already generating large gains. Parents were not that interested in it. They were not willing to pay for it. The schools were not that interested in it. The reason why so in other words, solutions are available. The reason why solutions don't get used is to a large extent because there is actually indifference to this problem. The general view of the whole system, and that I'm not blaming teachers particularly. Teachers, in a sense, are often the ones who are most struggling with it, is that the parents, the syllabus framers, all the powerful people in the education system, the view is that the point of the education system is to train global quality educated students. Notwithstanding the fact that most of our children I think they have the talent to get there, but will need a lot more investment. So what happens is, in fact, that the teachers decide that, look, I can't teach most of these kids because they're in class 7, but they can't read. So I'm going to teach the top 3 or 4 people, and that's it. So you have an entire education system that's focused on the top. This is not an accident. This is a result of the fact that our education system comes out of a colonial education system whose entire goal was to create a comprador class which would work for the colonists, whose job the whole point of the system to select the small minority who could be good enough that the colonists wanted them, and the rest they didn't care about one way or the other. That's how our background is. That's still this talk of excellence. We talk a lot about excellence, about how merited students are suffering, not recognizing the fact that people's backgrounds are very different. The many people come from caste backgrounds where for thousands of years they were explicitly excluded from education, and they're competing with people who are whose parents and grandparents were teachers or pandits, or where there's just so much structural inequality that the idea that we should then aim for some objective thing called excellence is clearly meaningless. But that obsession of elitism is everywhere. I think I think we can do a lot. We can do by a lot if we give up with this obsession of some objective standard we have to meet. I think the most important thing that every child is able to be at grade level. And with the grade level, we have to change the grade level to get there. We should change it. We should be willing to invest so that the education system doesn't function by destroying the confidence of every child who sees himself failing the system. I think we are a much better, stronger nation if our curriculum was a little less advanced, but our children were a lot more confident. And we see movement there. The new education policy does allow a bit more of an emphasis on basic skills, but I think it will take a whole change in mindset to get there. And I think there's lots of challenges. It's also the case that at this point, I think the goal is, if we want it, is very straightforward. If we really want to do it, we can do it. And we owe it to the children to do it. And I think, just to come back to the pandemic in my last minute, let me say that I think we really should be aware that the pandemic has made all of these problems much worse. And therefore, to return to school as if the last 2 years didn't happen would be insane. We should start by accepting the idea that many of the children, especially the older children, have lost the habit of being in school. They have been, working often, and they're working with their parents. Their mothers have taken them to work with them. Low-income children in much of India need to be drawn back to school, to be given the assurance that they are not going to be treated as idiots because they have fallen behind, whereas the other children who happen to have parents who could provide them with inputs are so much ahead. We have to deal with that heterogeneity. And if we don't, we will really perpetrate a tragedy. So this is a good moment to take stock. I think there's a lot of thought, including West Bengal, about opening schools. Let's open schools with our eyes open so that we don't, we already have a problem. Let's not make it worse. Use it as an opportunity to refocus education and towards a more democratic educational system. Thank you.
Thank you, Abhijit, for this wonderful talk, and entirely based on your research so far. And one can see that a lot of research has gone into it. It's not just the policy conclusions that you are making, it's entirely based on solid research. So this is the way to go. We'd welcome some questions, and maybe a couple of questions Abhijit would answer. So let me look at the chat box, and yeah, so questions are coming. I'm sorry, I have to be selective because we don't have a lot of time to answer all these questions. So One question I find that, this question is on no detention policy up to class 8. Now, you must have noticed that in our public discourse on school education, there's a couple of things actually come up again and again and again, and as if we don't have any sort of agreement on that. So this is a question of no detention policy that the schools in India will follow, and in West Bengal as well. No detention policy till class 8. Is that good or bad?
I think it's good if we are going to do the complementary investment, which is the no detention policy works very well if the goal is to have if there is an investment in every child being at grade level. And that's the point I was making, which is that we don't make that investment. Then if you're going to let children slide, then of course the class becomes less and less relevant for them. They just don't know what's happening anymore. They can't read, but you give them an essay in history to write. But they can't read, they're not going to write it. So it's, you can't, if you are going to have a no detention policy, you really need to invest in making sure that every child is at grade level or close to grade level. And I think then we should do, I'm arguing for, being realistic in our ambitions, but that doesn't mean, I think we teach a lot of content which children could very well skip. They don't need to learn all the content right now. If they only had their confidence, their ability to articulate their thoughts, their ability to read, their ability to do basic mathematics, their ability to master basic logic, I think they would be in a much stronger place, especially if we can help them feel that they're on top of whatever they're being taught. Their self-confidence, the education system, partly what it does is it destroys the self-confidence of the children. The child who told me, look, if I could do this, I would be in school, had before that given me perfect, I had given him we had 3 shoppers, and 3 shoppers had come and asked him for 3 different sets of things. One was 200 grams of this and 600 grams of that. He did all of them perfectly instantly. Then he tells me, I cannot do mathematics. That's a way, we are really breaking these children.
Yeah, somewhat related point is that, at some point you said that, some of these partial interventions may be counterproductive. And you give the example of CCE. Yeah. So I mean, it's somewhat related to this end of the year exam and no detention and related issues. So why do you think that CCE may be counterproductive?
Well, I think the CCE will be counterproductive if we don't we don't put the emphasis on getting every child to grade level, because then what CCE does is it essentially every day you are just told that you are this much behind, but I'm not doing anything about it. It's in a sense it's highlighting your deficiencies without doing anything to help you. And in a sense it doesn't happen. I mean, we work with Haryana state government on CCE, and it really doesn't. The teachers find it pointless. I know that this child can't read. What am I doing with, why am I wasting my time? In a sense, we have to start by recognizing that most of these children are not at grade level.
I think 2-3 questions are on this pandemic and digital divide, particularly, some groups of children, I mean, from some social background. They are deprived of the whatever technology that we are using to input instructions, particularly digital technology. So I think these questions are on this digital divide. So do you have anything in your mind, in terms of alternative, what could be done?
I think it's more that I think the useful thing to say is that I think the digital divide. I think it was I think the digital model there is way to use it that could be, I think the pandemic made it much harder. Because in principle, I don't think that, at this stage of development of digital technology, most villages could easily have some access to digital education. It's not that hard. They have internet. Some people have internet. Internet access is cheap. Tablets are cheap. You could imagine providing, and we are doing an experiment with Pratham on exactly that. So it's not that hard to do it. So in other words, I don't think the point is digital versus is supplementary education opportunities, which, since the children are already, you have less access to outside learning, giving them free some idea, something to enjoy, something to explore. I think those are very good uses of digital technology. So I think in principle, without the pandemic, one could imagine group learning of different kinds, where you come in. Yes, the school is done at whatever at 3, but then in the evening you could have children watching a digital lecture together, and while individual parents couldn't afford the infrastructure, the state can. It's not that expensive now. I mean, this is one of the things that's got cheap, very, very cheap now. I mean, internet has got very cheap, tablets have got very cheap relative to everything else. So I think we should be thinking positively about it.
There are some specific questions like, do you think that new economic policy can have something positive to offer?
New education or education policy?
New education policy.
I think there are, I mean, we'll see what it does. There is a lot of recognition of the importance of basic skills, which is a good thing. I think that's one of the ways in which it's an improvement on whatever we had before. But I think we need to take it seriously. We need to not use it as another placeholder for the status quo. The status quo is really not working.
Thank you very much. I think that most of the questions, some of them are very similar, so that's why I clubbed them together and I asked you these questions. And so if we have some of our senior teachers here, and if you would like to ask some questions to Abhijit, please. I can see that some of our seniors and our dadas are here. So if you anyone, Ovidubda, Shomenda, Amitabhuda, any of you, if you have any question. Yeah, Ovidubda, please.
I'm just curious. Is there any estimate of teachers? How many teachers are attending school, rather than student attendance? Is there
Yes, so ASAR has numbers on it, and I think the number is close to 80%, if I remember right. 76, close to 80%.
Thank you. Anyone else? Okay, so if there is no further question, then we would like to end here. And I thank Professor Abhijit Vinayak Banerjee for this wonderful session, and even including questions and answers, and the kind of clarity that he has in his discussions is really instructive for all of us. That is extremely clear on the issues that he has talked about today, and it's very close to our heart, and we are very happy to have him here today, and we all are enriched by his talk today. Thank you very much. And now it's over to Santanu. Santanu, are you going to say something? Yeah.
Yes.
Okay.
Thank you, Achin.
Thank you, Professor Banerjee. Thank you, Professor Chakraborty. So we had a lovely session. Now is a formality from our side, just to propose vote of thanks. So, on behalf of Maulana Azad College, Kolkata, I express our sincere thanks and gratitude to Professor Abhijit Vinayak Banerjee for his kind consent to deliver the lecture today. Professor Banerjee, we are indeed deeply honored by your august presence. And as you said at the very beginning, this is the institution where we came to write our part one examination more than 4 decades ago. So I hope you relish that memory. So we would love to host you offline when things improve, situation improves.
I hope soon.
Thank you. We express our gratitude to Mr. Abhijit Pathak, a friend of Professor Banerjee and an alumnus of this college. He has been instrumental and has helped us to arrange the program. In fact, his invisible hand has acted as the bridge between Professor Banerjee and Maulana College. Thanks are due to our principal, who has been a constant source of guidance and worked tirelessly to make the webinar a grand success.